Hello, astronomy and meteorology students. It's Mr. Johnson here. The goal of this video is to review the phases of the moon with you. It's a great idea to take some notes that will help you on assignments and the quiz that we have coming up over the solar system and the moon. To start off with, I'll remind you of our orientation that we will be discussing today. For the sake of our conversation, from here on out, you will be taking the role of the sun. I will have this lovely onion be my, it's the only thing I could find that was kind of round. This will be my Earth, and this golf ball will be my moon. So again, you are the sun, this is my Earth, this is my moon. They will not be to scale either in distance, nor will they be in scale in terms of size. So to begin with, I'll remind you that the Earth is orbiting the sun. So it would orbit the sun, it would go around you and come back. So that's 1 year. I will also remind you that during this time, it is rotating. So it is rotating counterclockwise as it's orbiting the sun. And we have the moon orbiting the Earth. So it's kind of going around like this. There's a lot of movement going on. Okay. So we have what's called remember our concept of the solar system is what's called heliocentric, talking about the sun is in the middle. And as the Earth moves throughout 1 year and each day, we get patterns in the sky of movement. And one of those patterns is going to be the pattern of the phases of the moon that we're going to be going over today. A few things that we want to make sure that we're on the same page about is how long it takes. Well, it takes about 29 and a half days for all of the phases to be complete. This is a little bit less than the amount of time that it actually takes for the moon to orbit the Earth. It has to do with how long it takes for a phase to be fully completed before it moves on to the next one. But without boring you with the details, it takes about 29 and a half days for the moon to go through one full cycle of its phases. There are 8 main phases during that cycle, and the amount of time that it takes is actually where we get the word month from. So it's kind of a fun thing to think about. A few words that we like to combine together to name the different phases of the moon. One is a new moon. A new moon is weird naming. I'm not totally sure why we call it that, but a new moon is one where we can't see it. Now from there, as the sunlight appears to grow bigger on the moon, as the moon kind of looks like it's getting bigger, we call it waxing because waxing is referring to growth or growing. About halfway through, about 14 days in, we will get what's called a full moon. So the whole moon will be illuminated. It'll be nice and big and round in the sky. From there, we have what's called waning. Wane means to shrink. So again, we wax until it's full, and then we wane until it's gone. We will be referring to what's called the terminator. The terminator is the line that separates the sunlit part of the moon from the dark part of the moon. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about orientation here. You hopefully did a lab and watched a few videos to talk about the different phases of the moon. To orient you to this picture, on the right-hand side here, we have sunlight. Now that sunlight is going toward the moon and the Earth. In the middle of the screen, we have the Earth. You can see the part of the Earth that's in nighttime and the part of the Earth that's in daytime here. From there, just outside of the Earth, we can see the moon and how it looks relative to the Earth when taking the sun into account. And outside is what it looks like, what the moon looks like from the Earth at that stage. So, to start off with, new moon. If you'll notice, the sunlight is always striking half of the moon. There's always part of the moon that's lit and always part of the moon that's not lit. And so for someone to say that the moon has, there is no such thing as the dark side of the moon. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So anyway, getting back to the new moon. If you look at this, again, you are the sun. This is the Earth, and here's my moon. You can imagine that when the moon is between the sun and you, or sorry, you, the sun, and the Earth, if I'm standing on this onion and looking at the moon with you being the bright light behind it, I'm not going to be able to see the moon at all because as it turns out, it's up during the day and the sun is way brighter. The whole reason the moon has any light at all is because it's reflecting sunlight. And it just so happens during a new moon, like we see here on the right part of the screen, we can't see the moon because the sun is illuminating the other side of it. Now, as the moon orbits the Earth, our perspective angled toward the moon means that we'll still see most of it, but it's starting to get to be a point where we can see a little sliver. From there, as it moves around, again, half of it's still illuminated, but we're just looking directly at it kind of sideways. If we think about the sun being here, we're looking at it sort of at a 90-degree angle. And as it continues to move around, we start to see more and more until we get a full moon. Now, this is the opposite. So this would be you are the sun, this is the Earth, and the moon is going to be over here. And so that sunlight is able to hit that full moon. Now, this is when a lunar eclipse can happen. And we'll bring up what that means here in a little bit. But the basic idea is that the moon is actually orbiting at a slight kind of angle. So it kind of goes kind of below and above and below and above relative to where the sunlight is coming. But again, the full moon is when you, the sun, are on one side of the Earth and the moon is on the other side of the Earth. So keep that orientation in mind. One thing that people will have that's a misconception is that they look at the shape here and they say, oh, it's curved. Well, the Earth is curved too. So clearly this must be the shadow of the Earth on the moon. It's not at all. If you look at it, in fact, the Earth is further away from the sun than the moon is. So how could we possibly be, we can't possibly be blocking the sun at that point. So let's get into the phases. Again, waxing means getting bigger, waning means getting smaller. Waxing is here to a full moon, and then waning here to a new moon. If you look over time, it sort of is like, it's almost as if the light were sweeping from the right side of the moon across to the left side of the moon. But again, it's not, it's just what angle we're viewing it at. So let's dive into things. I'll speed things up here. A new moon. This is invisible to the sky. The moon is between the Earth and the sun. Now, this isn't actually a picture of the new moon because, well, it's partially illuminated. We know that the new moon we can't see because it rises when the sun rises and it sets when the sun sets. In other words, the new moon is out when the sun's out. From there, as it continues its counterclockwise orbit around the Earth, it's growing, and so we call it waxing. We call this stage the waxing crescent because we can see a little sliver of the moon, and that shape is very similar to a crescent roll or like a croissant, like you might think, like a dinner roll. So again, the right side is illuminated, the left side is dark. As it continues to orbit the Earth, we get a side view, and that terminator more or less will split the left side that's dark from the right side that's lit up. So that's the key, is just a moment before we had just a little bit of the right side lit up. Now we have half of the right side lit up. This is confusingly called the first quarter. Quarter usually refers to 1/4 of something. And so people look at this and say, hold on, half of the moon is lit. Well, when they're saying first quarter, it's 1/4 of the way through the whole lunar cycle. Sometimes it's called the first half moon, but that's not correct. We will call it the first quarter. And again, this is 1/4 of the way through. From there, we are still growing in size of the illuminated part, or at least how much we can see. So we still call it waxing, but now we call it gibbous. Gibbous means sort of inflated. And so we have this sort of inflated or sort of bulging part of the moon. It's not fully lit, but it's getting close. And so everything between the first quarter moon and a full moon is going to be the waxing gibbous. So almost the entire moon, minus a little bit of the left side, is lit up. From there, we get a full moon, and this is when the entire moon is lit up. Again, I'll remind you that this is when the moon is here relative to the sun, which is you. So we get to see the entire thing, It's very bright and prominent at night. It's very obvious and easy to see. This gets a lot of the credit, this and crescents, because they look the nicest. A waning gibbous. There we've changed the name. Waning means getting smaller, and gibbous still means sort of inflated. So we can remember that it looks like a flashlight's sort of being swept from right to left across. Well, we know that that's not the case, but that might be a way to remember the order that these fall in. So almost the entire moon is lit up. That's the gibbous part. And since it's shrinking and the right side is dark, we call it waning. So waning gibbous. Just like the first quarter, the 3/4 moon is the left, or the last quarter moon is the left side is lit up and the right side is dark. So again, we're looking at it at a 90-degree angle. If we were to figure out where the sun is, it's over here shining directly on half of the moon. We just happen to be seeing part of the lit half and part of the dark half. And last but not least, we have the waning crescent. So this is the left side of that crescent roll. It's continuing to get smaller and thinner sliver. That's why we call it waning. And then crescent is that shape. So again, just to recap, sun is always shining on half of the moon. The moon takes about a month to orbit the Earth. As it does so, our angle of view on the moon changes. So we're able to see more and more and then less and less of the lit part. That gives us our moon phases. One thing that I'll ask you a few questions here. I'll pause and give you a minute to answer them in your head. In which phase is the moon between the Earth and the sun? What about the phase where the moon has the Earth which phase is the moon in when the Earth is between the moon and the sun? In other words, when the Earth is in between the sun and the moon, what phase is the moon in? And then last, well, there's the answers. Whoops, that's okay. So if you guessed the new moon was when the moon was between the sun and the Earth, you are right. Again, it's still there. We just can't see it because it's up during the day. Halfway through the lunar cycle, we have a full moon, and that is when half of that moon is lit up. We are able to see the entire half that's lit up. And one last thing that I'll bring up, just to add a little more clarity, there is no such thing as the dark side of the moon, because what happens is as the moon was orbiting the Earth, it actually is orbiting at the same speed that it's moving around the Earth. And so it's almost like the moon is continually showing us one side and not the far side. It's interesting. Somewhat recently, there has been exploration of the far side of the moon, which is, you can Google search different images of that. But anyway, so that's where I'll leave this video. If you have questions, please email me, let me know, and hopefully it's been helpful.